And so with that, I'm going to start with the panel discussions that we're seeing here this morning, our panel, and managing toolboxes and tools we see GCDs are utilizing more and more that are unique to what we've done over the past 10 to 12, 15 years. If you would, welcome our panel. We have Vanessa Escobar, we have Gary Westbrook, and we have Greg Sengelmann, and I'm going to let them open, I'll introduce them, or let them introduce themselves and show us a few slides as we work through the questions. Again, tweet those questions or be bold enough to come to the mic. I appreciate you all. So guys, this is all about a conversation about the toolbox. And Gary and I talked this morning that the toolbox tends to be, depending on where we're at and what we're doing, it tends to be, in my case, all I need is a pair of pliers and some wire and some duct tape and a hammer. But there's greater tools out there and intended tools within the toolbox provided to us as political subdivision. So we're going to talk about that. So the first thing is, before I put the first slide up, we're going to let Greg Sengelmann tell us a little bit about himself, his district, and answer that initial why do we, all three will answer, why do we have so many tools in those toolboxes?
Thank you, Dirk. My name's Greg Singlebond. I'm General Manager of the Gonzales County Underground Water Conservation District. I've been the manager since 2008. Our district covers a portion, probably about 3/4 of Gonzales County and a quarter of Caldwell County. And we cover the Carrizo-Wilcox, the major aquifers. We also have the Queen City, the Sparta, and the Yeagerwood-Jackson aquifer in our district. And so why do we have so many tools in our toolbox? Generally, it's because of the differing needs of the permittees. Okay, can everybody hear me? I'll see if I bring this closer.
We're going to adjust it for you.
Okay. So basically, it's the differing needs of the permittees. We come in, we have permittees that come to us and say, hey, I need a permit for 3 months. I've got a road construction crew that wants to use my well to water the road. So we've got that coming in. We've got permittees that say, I need, we're in the Eagleford Shale, so they'll say, I need a frack water well. That frack water well may be used one time. If they don't hit oil and gas, they move on to another spot. Or they hit oil and gas, that frack water well may be used 3 or 4 different times. Or in some cases, like some of our oil and gas companies, they put in major wells along the whole length of the aquifers, and they use them all the time. Okay, we have irrigation wells. So we've got several irrigation wells. Those wells are used through spring and summer mostly. In some cases, if it's a wet year, they may not even use the irrigation wells. We don't have a lot of crops. It's mainly hay and forage type deals, so they may not even use those wells. Then we have public supply wells. Those wells, if they're in district, they're spread across the district. If it's the local rural water supply, their wells are spread across the district. And they use those basically 24/7. They're always pumping it. People need water all the time. And then on top of that, we have the large well fields that people pump. And those are pumped 24/7 just about. So with the varying
what you're saying is there's such a complex situation that you need a bigger hammer, smaller hammer, set of pliers, something more complex depending on the task at hand.
Exactly. And also on top of that, each of those wells is located in maybe a different section of the aquifer. Some are located in the same aquifer, but in the outcrop versus down dip. So that makes a difference. Some of them are located in a major aquifer, some are located in a minor aquifer. So that makes a difference. And each of those wells, those different types of wells, depending on how they're used and where they're located, cause different impacts to the aquifer. So you got to take that into account also. So that's sort of why we have the different tools in our toolbox.
Good. Gary, let's hear your perspective. Gary's got a couple of slides to keep.
I just wanted to give a little background. And first off, we really appreciate the opportunity to be part of the panel. And I think all three of us were talking. We realize that we're not the only districts that are taking advantage of many different tools and different combinations across the state to address different issues and come up with solutions to local problems and situations. So we kind of see ourselves as being representative of a lot of districts that are doing a great job out there. A little background, we were created in 2001. Before we were created, there was an estimated already 35,000 acres of groundwater rights that had been leased. And in fact, if you look at our enabling legislation, it actually used the phrase, regulate the transport of water out of the district. So it's that was the big concern when we were created, is groundwater export. The reason is because we're not far from Austin, about 65 miles. To give you an idea, our district is Milam and Burleson County. If you were to have a nice diamond with Waco at the top, Austin on the west, Bryan College Station on the east, and Brenham at the bottom, we're right in the middle, and all the growth's coming our way. So we have a lot of resources. We also had a lot of concerns at the time. They're listed on the screen. And at the bottom, you see property rights. That, rule of capture, we heard about that yesterday. It's not going anywhere. We get to modify that rule, but every day we have to do something that affects someone's use of what already belongs to them. We're regulating a private property right. So that's a concern. When we look at our situation, well, I've been using this slide for 15 years. Because of all that, we got this big target. And somebody asked me one time, well, you got a nice logo. Is that the reason it's round? And anyway, we won't go into that. So if you go to the next slide, we'll talk about just some our toolbox. We've got a lot of issues that we've dealt with in different ways. We've used historic use permits. We've used different types of permits to address different situations. I like what we did with oil and gas, and some of the other districts have done something similar. We heard from oil and gas companies several sessions ago that they were concerned about going through a hearing process to get water permitted for frac use. And so we came up with a particular kind of permit that is good for one use, and the drilling and operating is good for 1 year. And so that way we don't have long-term impacts to the aquifer. It's very localized, and we can keep an eye on it. We know the usage, we can move forward, and that way the oil and gas companies are exempt from hearings. So we've created a different class. Now, they still have the right, like everyone else, to come in and go through a hearing process and acquire a 40-year permit if they'd like to. But that's just one of the ways that we use some tools in the toolbox to meet a localized need. You're able to aggregate your well fields. I know, Greg, you guys do something like that. And so these are just some of the tools that we were able to put together to meet the needs of our local folks. Because, as Greg said, each well and each production is going to have an impact on the aquifer. The question is how much, how long, and what you're going to do to manage that private property right. If you go to the next one, we'll talk about the fact that we use 40-year permits, but they have 5-year reviews. And a lot of people will compare maybe what Greg does. I think you guys have 5-year permits, right? Well, ours is very similar. We may issue the permit for 40 years, but every 5 years it has a review. And we can make adjustments just like your guys would come in and renew. And so we have an opportunity to make adjustments there. We have
Gary,
reporting.
that 5-year review, is that an administrative review, or is that brought back before the board in public hearing?
Actually, right now we're in a situation where the board has said until we see water level changes of significance, we're going to allow that to be an administrative. But soon it will come back to where it will fit back into a normal process, is what we would see. Yeah. So a few other tools that we use there, I think that are interesting. You see what we call protective drawdown limits. In our area, you'll see a management zone slide in just a little bit. And you need to remember that our aquifers are down-dipping aquifers. We have shallow portions, just like Greg's part of the Carrizo. And so we've adopted what we would compare to a desired future condition in that shallow part of those aquifers, and that's to protect those wells there. And that's very important to us. So we have desired future conditions, and we have these PDLs. So we've developed another tool based on the toolbox to meet the needs to protect the users and the citizens in our district. So these are just some of the other tools that we use there. There's some future tools that we're working on, and we're part of the team that just updated the GAM, the Groundwater Availability Model for GMA 12, the Central Carrizo-Wilcox. We worked with 2 other river authorities, 3 other entities, 3 other groundwater conservation districts, and the Texas Water Development Board. A little over $800,000, I believe, for that project for Interra to improve the model. But you can see what they improved. They improved recharge, storage values. We have a lot of faulting in our area, and we improved our understanding and our ability to predict impacts based on the faults. So that's one of the things that we've come up with. We're doing some aquifer storage and recovery evaluations. We're kind of working with TCEQ as they develop their rules, because we think the Carrizo-Wilcox is probably going to see a lot of that in the future. I know there's some going on in our neighboring county at Brazos Valley, and we're trying to get a handle on that. And then also, some of the other things that we're doing there as well.
So, Vanessa, you're unique. You're over the Edwards Aquifer, similar to our district, and you also manage now, similar to our district. I'm assuming it's pretty much down dip in the Trinity. So tell us about your role, your district, and lay out kind of those same questions. Why do we, or why do you utilize multiple tools within that box?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me here today. My name is Vanessa, and I've been with the district about 5 years. And I live very close to the district office, but basically, I would like to give a little bit of background. So our district was established in 1987 after a petition process was initiated by landowners and public water supplies in the area. So the district was designed to encompass the area of the recharge zone of the Edwards and the area that served as the primary supply for public water suppliers. It is, the Edwards Aquifer in this area is a hydrologically distinct segment, which is why, we're separate from EAA. And the Edwards in this area serves as a primary habitat for endangered species, and also serves to supply the Barton Springs Pool, which is an iconic natural resource in the Hill Country. We are a fee-based district, so we assess production fees based on actual permitted volume. And we're also unique in that we're very fortunate to have a supplemental fee that's statutorily assessed to the city of Austin. So with that fee, that's really enabled us to conduct and perform a lot of science and overall groundwater management, which is, we know that not all districts have that level of funding. So that's really important for us. We do have the kind of like an overlaying federal requirement because of those endangered species, and so now we have a incidental take permit and a habitat conservation plan. We also regulate the Trinity underneath the Edwards, and in fact, we went through an annexation process a couple sessions ago down in the Hays County area. So we have South Austin through Buda, and Kyle, and now the San Marcos area. So that's a shared territory with EAA. So our primary aquifers, as I mentioned, we regulate the Edwards and the Trinity, and they're a little bit different from each other, but they are both very highly variable karst aquifer systems. And so they're both very prone to drought, which plays into how we manage for drought. The Edwards in particular sees most of its recharge primarily from creek flow, and it serves, as the public water supply for about 70,000 people. So we estimate about 1,200 wells out in that area in our original jurisdiction. And so pumping from the Edwards directly correlates to spring flow and water level decline. And then the Trinity, on the other hand, it has its differences. It's slower to recharge, and we primarily manage pumping from the Lower Glen Rose and the Cow Creek systems. And it's highly variable as well, and also in the water quality, you'll see differences. But it is projected to be one of the highly stressed aquifers in the area, and we're seeing a lot of demand in the area since we've taken over, this new annexed area. And so this framework, over the course of time, since we were established, our board has developed its governing policies and rules through these iterative processes where we perform science-based evaluations, and then we take that information and thoroughly vet it through the affected stakeholders. and get folks to weigh in, and then we implement those policies that work for the situation. So that has evolved over time, and we've had to react to changes in our area. So it's important for us, you know, when we're talking about the management tools, that we have a variety of strategies that provide us flexibility as well as the applicant, the permittees flexibility.
So what you're speaking to here is that really you're moving into the second part of our questions, that being special permit conditions and or conditional permits or progressive permits.
Yes.
And so to keep those to focus on your slide, we can see some of that. Explain, were you always that way as a district, or has this evolved over time?
It's definitely evolved over time. I mean, initially when we were started, the primary focus was to provide those existing users with a permit, you know, because they had their investment-backed expectations at that time. But as we were able to perform more studies and learn more about the aquifer, we realized that there was already an extreme demand on the aquifer, and we were approaching that point to where we in fact did reach the sustainable firm yield for pumping. And so that really forced us to kind of modify the framework. And that's a key milestone right here, where we did the sustainable yield study. We had to move towards conditional permits for the Edwards. And then from there, we looked into establishing management zones so that there were other options for firm yield. And we all worked through the DFC process along with our endangered species protections. And most recently, we developed a very thoroughly vetted criteria for what it means to protect for unreasonable impacts. So it's evolved, and I project that it'll continue to evolve based on situations that arise. So that's what's important. To have the flexibility, the very tools, and to grow, to become creative. We all have to kind of, it's a little bit scary, but we have to get creative with.
So there's a connection
strategies
between, if I'm be so bold, between the monies that are dedicated toward scientific discernment, new tool development, new efforts. Is that money come from the city of Austin in that statutory? And does that what gives you the capacity to, it drives your policy over time? Or?
Well, we do get money from the production fees assessed on our permittees, and then I would say about 2/3 of our budget does come from the City of Austin fees, which are again statutorily required. So that's a unique strategy, for the state to think about, or other municipalities in the area that have a concern or a desire to participate in groundwater management. That's a way for municipalities to work in providing support towards overall groundwater management.
Great. So do you want me to go to your next slide?
Sure. And let's see if you can read it. So it's, we've talked about that it's important to have a variety of tools, and you develop these, oftentimes as you're reacting to situations and changes in your district, changes in the aquifer, because one size does not fit all. And so the primary, I guess, core framework of our regulatory system are these elements here in blue. And the big takeaway here is that really we are a demand-based permitting system. So a lot of districts have correlative rights, where we, on the other hand, are looking at, is there a beneficial use, and is there a reasonable demand, to go along with that beneficial use? And along with that, we manage for drought. So we manage for aquifer demand during drought. And we've had to establish, 2 different classes of permits in the Edwards, the historic and conditional permits. So a number of these things we'll talk about, but I also wanted to highlight that, we're a little bit unique in that we also manage the supply side of things. So we've tried to become innovative and support research and studies on things like alternative supplies. So we have rules in our district that are permitting rules for ASR and speak to the saline portion of our aquifer. And we also have a really unique recharge enhancement feature that focuses on improving the quality and quantity of water that's entering the aquifer. So you can go ahead. So there's some formatting, but basically drought is really important. So our aquifer fluctuates rapidly. It can rapidly recharge, and it also experiences declines as we enter in drought. So we have set up a data science-based system to track the conditions of the aquifers. So we have spring flow, and then we have an index well, and they track relatively closely to each other. And from there, we've developed a drought, schedule and curtailment methodology. So all our permittees, are going into drought at the same time, and everybody has to curtail at the same time. And this is backed up by enforcement of those requirements.
So those wells, the Love Lady, Lady well, and then Barton Springs, do you manage those gauges or those wells, or do you outsource that to somebody like USGS?
Those are our wells, but we do, I think we work with USGS on the telemetry for the Love Lady well, and then we house the data and process the data and basically clean it up. And so the Barton Springs, I believe we also work with USGS, but we have our own hydrogeologist team who's out there all the time, measuring and matching up, because these are critical, index triggers. So we want to make sure we're getting it right, when we say we're going into drought. So it's really a two-part kind of cooperative effort with our staff and theirs.
So looking into this question right here, let's see if we are moved to
sure. Okay.
Move to your desired future conditions as a part of, I believe this is still within your special permit conditions we talked about. Is this slide relevant to that?
Yes, this is relevant. I mean, this is one of the key takeaways as well, that, at the core of our legislative charges and our own district rules, we manage total production to avoid unreasonable impacts as well as to achieve the DFCs. And so for us, we do that in a three-part test. So really, we look at that non-speculative demand, which I talked about. Each permittee for its use type has to prove up that they have a demand that's reasonable. And then we also look at regional evaluations, which all of our districts do. We're trying to get a handle on what that new proposed pumping will do to the aquifer overall over the long term and to the DFC. But that can be tricky because, oftentimes there are tools that are not necessarily the best for these type of evaluations. They're too coarse, or tools don't exist, for these types of evaluations. And even when there are some models available, there's inherent uncertainty in those models, as you project out further into the future. So where we really focus our efforts in assessing for impacts is looking at these local evaluations. So we do aquifer tests, and we want to see how the aquifer responds to this proposed pumping.
So you're looking at models, but you're also looking at reality.
We're trying to see how did the aquifer respond, how is it recovering, use that data to better inform the models, and then to better inform the permit decision.
It's almost like we could put a quote on each side of that screen, and the quote being of Senator Perry yesterday. Get them get them what they need, permit them to the point where they're meeting their needs, but without hurting. Is that
correct?
I think of him in his comment yesterday in this particular slide.
Yeah, and that's where it really leads us into the discussion about special conditions. Like, after you've gotten that data, how reliable is it? What do you do with it? Is there a role for crafting specifically tailored permits for those specific situations to where you can find that flexibility and that balance in the middle? So,
Greg, I guess you're next on this. Is this your first slide right there? This is where we wanted to move to the question associated with that.
Sure.
No, that's not mine.
So did you answer this one already?
It's mine, yeah.
I'm sorry.
We
reshuffled the deck earlier, so I want to make
fine.
sure we didn't.
So this slide really speaks to what we were going into about conditional permitting. And so for conditional, leading into the discussion about conditional permits, for us, it goes back to our sustainable yield study for the Edwards Aquifer. And so we, early on, back in 2004, we were trying to get a handle on better understanding what does the pumping do, what kind of effects does it have on spring flow and water levels in general. And so our study found that there was a direct correlation, one-to-one from pumping to spring flow. And it actually helped us recognize that we had actually reached that sustainable yield. So that existing pumping at the time, we had reached the sustainable yield for firm yield pumping. So from there, we established our policies. The board established a policy of moving forward, trying to preserve and protect existing well owners as well as spring flow.
So these district board members, the initial science.
True. Yeah. I mean, it's a
perfect
perfect example of the
drove the
science
policy.
informing the policy. And so this was all a precursor to the DFCs. And for us, we have the benefit of having spring flow. Correlating the 6.5 CFS as our DFC. So the next slide, that's, after we learned about that, we reacted. We basically kind of drew the line in the sand in 2004 and moved to interruptible permits. So there were no more firm yield for the Edwards. However, we did want to continue to provide options. So that's where we came up with the system of conditional permitting. And so the box in green, within that, we have various classes of conditional permits. And one of those classes is unique. We reserve a certain amount for ASR. So it's ASR Edwards source supply that could be used to be stored in the Trinity for later. And so the idea we were trying to work out here, we wanted to be creative, and so we established like an upper mag, which was that played out when the aquifer was in high full times, and then we established a lower mag that was to preserve a certain CFS during drought. So we wanted to allow for some more pumping up front with the expectation that we would require deeper curtailments on the other end when we went into drought.
So upper mag, lower mag kind
Correct.
of bookended your permitting scheme.
It was one way we were trying to be creative to provide some room for additional pumping after we drew that line. So.
Well, you need to answer anything else there?
What, do you have any more questions? Or
Well, I have some questions, but I'm going to reserve those. And I know the rules of the game, so is if they have questions for each other, they're allowed to just cut in. They agreed to that.
Sure.
So great.
That's my slide.
Yep.
It looks like I need to up my game a little bit.
Yeah, I liked my slides until I saw Vanessa's too. So.
Okay, so at this part, we're going to talk about our special permit conditions. And so I wanted to talk about 3 of them in particular, so just to show you the differences and stuff. So we're going to talk about public water utility, CCN permits. So that's our local public water supply district. I want to talk about brackish water, oil and gas permits versus exemptions, and then also concentrated or large well field permits in there. So go to the next slide. Okay, when I say special conditions, one thing I wanted to let everybody know, it's not like, well, you get more water because you're so-and-so, or you get a longer permit term.
I mean, they're not really special?
They're not really special.
Okay.
Just because their needs are different, we tailor things different. So everybody has common rules. The aquifer production rates, if you're in the Carrizo, you get 1 acre-foot per acre. You got a production term limit of 5 years. You got to have water usage reporting to us. Property line well spacing. We have aggregate well fields if you have that, and we also allow peaking production rates in the summer because people need that. So when we say special conditions, it's not you get more water or anything like that. But special conditions, again, so we got groundwater ownership versus contractual rights in the versus a CCN, permits versus exemptions, and single wells versus concentrated or large well fields. So go to the next slide there. So on the public water utility CCN permits, we allow the Gonzales County Water Supply Corporation to use their CCN as their permitted water rights, okay? And so because we look at it as they're trading water supply for those water rights, okay? So they're providing a service to the people that they're pulling that water out from. So it's a trade-off. But then again, some people want to use their water rights differently. Some might want to put an irrigation well in. Somebody might want to lease it off to another utility. And so we allow that to happen. So what we do is we use the CCN, but we pull out all permitted, leased.
I know, I'm speeding us up. So
okay, we pull out all
She's got
permitted
her 10 fingers up, meaning 10 minutes.
land, and what's left is their CCN permitted rights. Okay, brackish water, oil and gas versus exemptions. Okay, so this based on where the Eagle Ford Shale lies in our district. It falls right over the heart of the Yagowa-Jackson Aquifer, which is a minor aquifer, and it falls in the down dip edge of every other major or minor aquifer. So it just so happens that we can use brackish water as an incentive to the oil and gas industry. The Yagowa-Jackson has shallow wells, okay? Everybody in the exempt deal is shallow because it's usually the best water in there. When you go deeper, it gets more brackish. So we exempted deeper wells in the Yagowa-Jackson aquifer because it's more brackish. And the down dip for the Carrizo and that, those wells are about 3,000, or 28 to 3,000 feet deep. And so that's brackish water, and nobody's using that either.
So let's go to Gary. And Gary, I'm going to ask you to kind of ease through that because we've heard part of your special conditions, and I think they're critical because each of you have now extracted some tools.
Yeah.
We've seen the others. Let's hear about your special tool.
We've talked about rule of capture, and the property owners, own the right to their water. So how do you allow for production that may affect conditions in the aquifer and then allow for new projects later? And so all of our permits are adjustable based on that. We used to use the term haircut. If you've been around groundwater a long time, you've heard that term. The existing permit holders would have to allow a reduction to allow for a new permittee to come in. And so our permits are adjustable, again, to achieve the desired future conditions and the protective drawdown limits. So that's important. An additional, an applicant can go and get a variance or a waiver from their neighbor. We require contiguous acreage. So if I want to produce here and my brother or my family has land on the other side of you, but you don't want to be part of our production, I can get a waiver from you, which allows them to be contiguous to me. Or I can get a waiver that he says, I'll allow you to have a little bit more production, and which normally would violate your property rights, but you can give me permission, and I can bring that. So we do have some.
So the way we frame that up, when we talk to people, we tell them what the rules are, and then they panic.
That's
and then we always have a but. There's attorneys involved, so here's one of the buts. But you could do this.
So we've got those exemptions, and we have required mitigation before.
So we're gonna go into mitigation funds and Conservancy because I really want to make sure we hit on this and then open the floor to questions. We're going to kind of pass on the groundwater management zones just to keep in line with the meat of our discussion. So Greg, I think you're first here on talking about mitigation and conservancies and the things that you do. And again, be mindful we're a little short of time.
Okay, I'll go through them pretty quick. So our mitigation fund is funded by the permittees capable of producing greater than 3,000 acre feet per year. And it's voluntary. There's nothing in Chapter 36 says that we can make them do a mitigation fund. So they all voluntarily agreed to the mitigation fund that we have. We manage it. We had to hire a manager started out about $45,000 a year to manage the program for us. And we have mitigation fund areas. We had 3 big permits on one side of the district early, so we set up a mitigation fund. Then 2 big ones came in on the other side of the district, so we separated that out to a eastern and western fund. Wells covered by mitigation, they have to be drilled before those permits were granted, completed in the Carrizo Aquifer, because all the large well fields are in the Carrizo Aquifer. Non-public supply wells, and they have to meet the criteria for mitigation.
So keep in mind possibly questions from the crowd here.
Sure.
So the next part of that.
Yes, so go to the next one there.
Okay.
Okay, so what does our mitigation work consist of? So we lower pumps and wells to a depth that exceeds the anticipated 50-year water level declines based on the groundwater modeling that we have. So when we fix that well, we want to fix it once. So even though they're going to have to change that pump out, do things to those wells after we fix it, we've done our job for the next 50 years, hopefully.
But if that well has a pinch point, you can't get it there, is that
if there's a restriction in the well, if it's too shallow, then we will go in and re-drill the well and install a
So
pump.
again, if that person got hurt, we're mitigating the potential hurt.
Right. We're
Before the
mitigating.
hurt exists, it sounds like. The extreme.
We
of it.
tried. We had very good intentions to get it done before all this happened, but people weren't aware of it. We went and asked them. They said, my well's fine. We don't want to do anything right now. So that plan fell apart pretty good. We had farmer flowing wells. Our aquifers were full back then before these started. And so that caused some issues we weren't aware of because these flowing wells are out in the middle of nowhere. So if you want to put a pump in, you have to bring electricity to them. So we had to bring electricity to the wells.
So your original $45,000 commitment turned into
Our
1.3?
cost to date is $1.3 million, and we're still going on that. So that gives you an idea of what conditions can happen to when these big well fields come in. Electrical grid connections, you can see the different costs there. I won't go through them all, but
Well, let's go to Post Oak then, because Gary's got some new tools he's extracted with his board.
Right.
Let's hear about those.
We got several new tools. We got a new board dashboard. If you want to know what we're doing, you go to there and it tells you where the committees are at in their process of working. We drive everything through committees. This past January, we adopted our well assistance program, which we really looked at what you guys were doing. We don't predict and project the same needs because in Greg's area, you've got large producing wells going in amongst and at similar depths to existing wells, and most of the large projects we have are way down depth and further removed. So there was a need to look at what you did and kind of modify that. Again, different tool to fit a different need. And all of this is the consequences of balancing that maximum production with conservation. But then this year we got a brand new tool, and we're very excited about it. It's a conservancy. And you look around, we found lots of different conservancies, but nothing really that dealt with groundwater. And so these are the things that we developed based on that. We call it the Aquifer Conservancy Program. We've had a lot of folks request it. We've had public meetings to gather stakeholder input, and they have driven this process all the way. We've made changes to the draft form of it several times so that now we're meeting the needs of our citizens. It's specific to the Carrizo-Wilcox because that's where the impacts are predicted and projected to occur.
And I think a lot of us have seen and heard about that, especially those that went to your summit recently, and encourage those that might still have questions to ask those.
Yeah, we'd love to have questions because every now and then somebody comes up with something we hadn't thought of. But we believe it allows landowners to create a partnership between each other and the district to set aside land and water for the future. That's what this is about. It's about being able to make a commitment to conserve your groundwater for future generations. And so there's actually a financial reward for doing that as well. And we've had a great response. You were at our summit. We had about 220 people there. We had 100 people take out our signs, which you saw the little logo up there. I support the Aquifer Conservancy. So it's going really well.
Vanessa, before we get to the questions, we're getting close, but I wanted you to hit on two things from your district. One is obviously mitigation and addressing the potential hurt.
Sure.
And secondly is just touch very briefly on those management zones.
Okay, sure. So for our district, we find special conditions particularly useful when it comes to finding that reasonable approach for assessing unreasonable impacts related to these large-scale water marketing projects. So Gary and Greg have been dealing with water markers probably for years, and we're just now starting to see that kind of demand on the Trinity. And so through our science-based approaches, we are trying to do those evaluations, but there are limits with models. And so what do we do with that information? It can be problematic for a board to make a decision with very limited information. And so we find that there's a variety of uses for special conditions that range from mitigation, range to monitoring, phased-in permits, and proactive avoidance measures. And so we think there's a place for all of that if the situation warrants that, but particularly, it brings that flexibility for the applicant as well as the board. It allows us to adjust permits, based on actual data. The monitoring is a very key component for us. So when we explore the idea of monitoring special conditions, we're thinking about compliance index wells. We want to establish some kind of trigger with these water level thresholds, and we want to let the aquifer tell us how to react. the aquifer data is what's going to inform how we take that response.
So as Gary said, this speaks volumes, this particular slide. And Gary, did you have a comment associated with that?
Our aquifers don't work the way that yours do, but still we use the same sort of an evaluation on going through thresholds toward that desired future condition so that we make adjustments and curtailments and in our management. And I think that's, I like that slide, even though it's not reflective of our aquifers, it is reflective of the process that many of us in this room go through.
And I wanted to add to that with regards to mitigation. For us, that's a new concept for us. We want to approach it very cautiously because we see an intense administrative burden on the district, on the staff. We have a budget to work with, but not that much. And so I think we have to put a lot of thought into crafting carefully conditioned, mitigation provisions. And for our district, by our rule, we can only really consider that at the applicant's proposal, and it has to be agreed upon negotiated agreement. And so we do have some rules in our district rules that speak to what the very minimal requirements are for a mitigation plan, because we're looking for things like funding, who's going to carry this effort out administratively.
So we're tight on time, and just in 3 words, what's something each of you would like to add? What's one short takeaway you would like as we've worked the 4 of us together in preparation for this discussion?
Balance. I mean, we're forced by legislation and statute for balance, conservation and production.
And I would say the special conditions really should be looked at as a tool. It provides the ability to be flexible and adapt to unique conditions, unique permitting situations for each applicant, to give their side some level of assurances, and to give also the other side assurance that they will be protected based on actual science.
Fine is take note of these different conditions and things now before these things hit you if you haven't already done it, because it's easier to think about it ahead of time than it is to react once these permits come in.
Yes, totally.
Things.
But this speaks to Chapter 36 being just a very diverse tool for us to utilize. But at the end of the day, these tools help our boards make good, sound policy that still finds that balance. Is that a good assessment?
I liked her slide that said we got policy tools, and then you got, really for us, enforcement tools, because that leads to the planning that Greg talks about. Think outside the box. If you got a box, get rid of it, because you really got to be creative to meet the needs of your local folks and all the demands that are coming against you.
So at this time, are you getting a lot of one question? You just go to the mic, and I guess it's a Twitter question, or is it just one you made up?
Are we live? It's kind of a Twitter question. It was sent to me by text message, so we're going electronic here. The question is, how much groundwater does each of your districts produce?
Current production?
Current production.
If you take out the alluvium, our current production is less than 20,000 acre-feet a year. If you include the alluvium, which is where all of our agriculture is, it can be another 20 to 30,000 acre-feet a year.
Greg?
Carrizo's about 37 to 40, just depends on how much frac water usage each year, so it changes a lot. Most of our large permittees haven't maxed out their permit yet, and so that is gradual. As the populations grow, they gradually add more water, so it's going to be growing all the time.
And Vanessa?
I don't know that off the top of my head. For the Edwards and Trinity, we have this database that spits out the number, and I haven't taken a close look lately, but I could find out. Sorry.
Any other questions from the crowd? Nobody's bold enough? I was disappointed yesterday, and are we still? Well, this group of experts, I will tell you, they'd be happy to visit with any of you in reference to their slides and their presentations, and thank you each. You add a lot to our discussion, and again, it reaffirms the caveat that I was able to capture, and I think 2 of us wrote that down of Senator Perry yesterday. Maximize get people what they want, not maximize, but get people what they want.
What they need.
But without hurting. that spoke volumes to us that are on the groundwater management side. Again, thank you. If you give our group a round of applause. Yes,
I'm
one more
sorry.
question.
We did have a really good question come in. Forgive me, but the question is, I think for you, Gary, which is where does the money come from for the Conservancy program?
So we're, as Vanessa mentioned, our permit holders pay fees. We collect and we assess and collect fees on permitted amounts for both production and export. And so our export permits are around 71,000 acre feet, and even though only about 2,000 acre feet is currently being exported out of the district, obviously you guys have heard of Vista Ridge over and over. It's a 50,000 plus acre foot permit, but those folks have been paying on that permit for several years, and we're going to use that funding to create this conservancy. We can use those funds for conservation. That's what we're focusing on.
So I have one final assessment, a personal assessment of each of you and it speaks to the groundwater world as a whole, the management teams that I see and our board members who know what you do. Each of you, it appears you really got your A game is on. You love what you do, and you believe in what you do. And I appreciate each of you for that.
And it takes a lot of board members out here. It takes a lot of creativity, it takes a lot of working together, it takes a lot of support of your staff. It takes some I got 3 board members back there. It takes some difficult work in the public's eye to make hard decisions. But we got to make the right decisions moving forward for groundwater districts to be successful. And that's, you board members, y'all are the key, man. You guys learn as much as you can, do the best you can, keep working. It's important.
Well, I'll end it with a quote from a great theologist. Not really, though. I just want to get Gary excited. His name's Will Rogers. And he just simply says, people's minds are changed through observation and not argument. And so in this world we live in, this groundwater world, we need more peacemakers. We need more people like Will Rogers. And these 3 epitomize that. Thank you.